Welcome to the Mike and Doug Show. I'm Doug. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Doug, how are you this Monday?
Well, I was just sitting back reading some fantasy novels, and Tyla asked us to talk about this wonderful show that she found, hour and a half long, where they're talking about all the conspiracy theories and all the right books when you're moving in that direction. But she wanted us to give our critique of it. I'm happy to
Yes.
do so. So I listened to the whole tape, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And if I'm sure you'll see that this is connected to a video of three people. One of the guys I'm going to call the young guy from School Sucks, because that's the name of his site. The other guy is the host, and he's from history, I guess. And the third guy, Kevin, I'm just going to call him like Kevin in the cave, because he was in a cave. And I'm going to talk about what they said and the limitations because it is a perfect example of what I have been, for some strange reason, harping on for the last few weeks. I've mentioned this repeatedly, that if you have Carol Quigley's book, Tragedy and Hope, as the book that you can read behind you, like if I had it right back here and it was Carol Quigley's book or his three books, then I need to tell you that you've been brainwashed and that you need to go the next step. And you know all about that because you've looked at all that. And let's hear what you have to say in your nice critique, because when I go after their critique, I'm going to unfortunately rip Carol Quigley to pieces.
Well, I spent the time this morning listening to that video too, and my first reaction was, wow, those guys have a lot of the facts straight, and they, in our experience, are interpreting them properly. And then the more I thought about it, the more I began to realize that the limitations that were left out were really central to understanding the full picture. And as we have discovered, certain key facts were missing from their information. And I don't criticize them for that. Based on the information they had, they were doing their best. And I thought the host was the most clear about the role of the British and what they're attempting to do today. The other two were, one was rather apologetic, and then the other one was sort of in the middle. So, I think overall, I can't believe I haven't seen these videos until now. And it was one of our listeners who sent it to us because they started these broadcasts fairly early in 2013. And that was about the time that we discovered that we needed to be paying attention to Cecil Rhodes. And we approached it in Leader Technologies from a different angle. I wasn't attempting to study history as such. I was trying to figure out who stole our social networking invention and who was it, when did they do it, and why did they do it. And that led us to keep marching back in history till we discovered the central figure in Cecil Rhodes and the people around him. And I think those guys properly identified the problem as occurring in about 1880 and moving forward from there. What I found, I don't really want to criticize them at all because I think that they're doing their best with the information they had. But what I did discover is that they've gotten closer to figuring out the central role of the Pilgrim Society, but they saw it more as a continuum that led to the Council on Foreign Relations in the Chatham House or the British Institute of International Affairs. And so they saw the Pilgrims as sort of dropping off in their story. And I think that was the purpose that Carol Quigley had in the way he presented the information. And in fact, as we know, if you type Pilgrim Society, you're going to find little to nothing in anything that Quigley said that would point to them as the true secret society controllers of what's going on now.
Yes, I'd have to say I quite agree with that. Um, and then, of course, I add my thing. And my thing is going to say something like, good first step, gentlemen. But now, when you mention Eustace Mullins and the Federal
Mm-hmm.
Reserve, if you don't go back and look at Ezra Pound, then you don't know what you're talking about. If you mention Carol Quigley and Lionel Curtis and you don't go back to the three Rothschilds that were there with Cecil Rhodes, who created the plan, which everyone else then built upon afterwards. And if you can't say anything more about the Pilgrim Society except that you got the book on it, and that the Pilgrim Society has nice meetings, and that through ambassadors they do this and that, then you've missed the point that Serco owns America, that the Brits own our patent office, that
Yeah.
Serco runs our Navy, that
Right.
everything we do is controlled by the British. So what you've done is you have fallen prey to the challenge of those who earnestly go after the conspiracy theories. All those conspiracy theory books that they mentioned, they're lovely. I've read most of them. I actually did write down 2 or 3 notes of something that Kevin said. I went, oh, whoa, what was that? And I went and researched it, and they had it wrong. Matter of fact, when they mentioned that the Pilgrims Trust was connected to the Pilgrim Society, no, it's not. So that was the only mistake I found them making. And then, when they talked about Zionism and Moses Hess and Seeley is the inspirer of some of these things, and Ruskin. Well, here's what I have to say about that. All right, now, all of you who have Carol Quigley's book Tragedy and Hope and the Anglo-American, what's it called?
Establishment.
Establishment. Did you read his first book? Because if you didn't read his first book, you don't know who he really is. He says clearly who he is. Right in the introductions to his books, he says exactly who he is. Now, they mentioned, these three guys mentioned that Quigley even had sympathy for them. He just came short of joining the group that he was supposedly revealing. The Anglo-American establishment. But in the Anglo-American establishment, they don't talk about the Pilgrim. He doesn't talk about the Pilgrims at all.
No, there is no reference to the Pilgrims.
So he's missed the whole mark. What he's done is he's created the lineage of the corporate dynasties from Britain as if he is kowtowing to them. Quigley was one. He worshipped them. He wanted to be one of them. He probably hoped that he would get after 30 years of teaching at Georgetown, the first Jesuit university in America, that if you don't go through, you cannot be a brainwashed politician or a high-level military person in the DOD. Not possible if you don't go through Georgetown, right? Well, he taught there for 30 years, and in a Jesuit institution. Okay, the Jesuits also, with Rockefeller, founded the Council on Foreign Relations, and these three gentlemen don't seem to get the connections to the modern world. That's why we're truth history applicable today. That's what we are. And through leader technology, as I always call it, the linchpin that shows who is still doing this today and what is their program, what is their plan. That's what we work back to.
I did like the conclusion that they drew, that the whole technocracy movement was really developed by these guys, and they strongly identified the idea that these people were about controlling technology, and of course that's our entry into this whole sphere. Was the fact that they stole social networking, and in the scheme of things, we can now see their mentality was to steal and rape and pillage and plunder any technology that allowed them to establish better control over communications. So that part they got right.
Except that they didn't add your discoveries.
True.
But that was in 2013, so I don't know what they're doing today. Maybe they are caught up. And so anything I'm saying is about that video only, not about what those guys think now or who they are or what they are. But the point is that if you don't know that Tesla's technology was stolen by those same people who were...
They mentioned that.
Yes,
they mentioned that.
And Marconi and the whole, cardboard cutout, as they mentioned even the transatlantic cable, because that's the way they communicated, and they always mention the American International Corporation. Well, who is that? Anybody? That's not American. It's not international, and it's not even a corporation. These were Wall Street British bankers who decided to be the venture capital behind Bolshevism and behind every ism. Anything that would disrupt the world, that would keep what? What is their goal? And that's what these three gentlemen don't have. What is their goal? Well, their goal is, if those three gentlemen would have read Quigley's first book, they would have known. Let me outline it for you. And that's what he taught for 30 years. He taught the evolution of civilizations. He taught what Oswald Spengler was the expert on for a long time, who I used to love to talk about. And then, well, my good friend William Rowan Thompson did his version, and Gebser did his version, but Arnold Toynbee did his British version of the evolution of civilizations. And what does it do? Whitewashes the British influence. And at the end, what does it conclude? That we don't have to go into decline like all these theorists say about the evolution of civilizations. We don't have to. Here's what he says in a nutshell. Carroll Quigley.
You're talking about Toynbee or Quigley?
Both. Okay. But I'm specifically now going to refer to what Quigley says. His theory is that all empires have an instrument of expansion, and that they'll all fade and die away because they'll go too far in expanding. But he says, as long as that instrument of expansion becomes an institution of expansion, that empire, that imperialistic empire, can continue without degrading and without faltering and without falling like all other civilizations have before us. And what does he say the key to that is?
The English race.
Yes, and what do we have that's bigger than everybody else, and was actually put into policy by Henry Kissinger and the Council on Foreign Relations, because he's one of the most evil people on the face of the earth right now? Nuclear deterrence, and the fake nuclear weapons that were used in World War II, which then became the supposed deterrent for us being the Americans, the Anglo-American. We are the military arm of the British Empire. We are part of the Commonwealth. Lionel Curtis, the secretary of Alfred Milner, who was more or less carried on what W.T. Stead was doing initially with Cecil Rhodes, created what these three gentlemen talk about a lot, creating the Cecil Rhodes different versions of his will. Well, what was his will? His will was hegemony, depopulation, continuous war, banking control, or the elite control of everything. And these three gentlemen, the only mistake they make is, I have to say, first off, that the host needs to slow down before his head explodes.
Yeah, they did march pretty fast.
The host of School Sucks, he needs to catch up before he talks. He needs to do his homework before he talks. And Kevin needs to stop reading off of his notes the list of who's who in history for all that created what he assumes is the conspiracy theory behind what is created now. I don't care. It's good to know that. But if you don't know what now is, and that's how we got to the conspiracy theories, we didn't go to the conspiracy theories and test them.
Right.
We went backwards, as you pointed out from the beginning. And it led with evidence a trail back to the criminals that is so wide that anyone could see it once they see it. So my deal is, I think you and I should sit down with these three gentlemen and have a couple-hour talk, and make sure that they point them in the direction of the evidence that will be able to help people out. Because running down a list of who's who in conspiracy theory books and what they say, and basically this is a bunch of dots. They've connected the dots. But
yeah, they have that great little flow chart.
But that's not the living animal. So it's a connect the dots picture of a squirrel. It's not a squirrel. Okay, it's not living. They need to see the livingness of it. The livingness is, if they're correct, if those three gentlemen are correct, then those same families should still be in control today. And they are. And we've proven
they are.
So many times it's ridiculous. And it's a very small group of people. Well, that is carrying it through. But a lot of the things they said were accurate. For instance, Bavarian Illuminatiism, and descrying that did not become what people say it became. Correct.
Well,
things like that. Excellent.
On that particular issue, as you know, we dug into that, and we found Bavarian Illuminati is a little bit too generalized. We need to say Mayor Amschel Rothschild's Illuminati, because he's the one that funded it in Bavaria. So the Bavarian part's right, but it lacks one level of specificity that totally changes the puzzle, because he was the one who was also developing the whole banking model that the Illuminati was fitting into for his marketing campaign.
Adam
along
Weishaupt,
with
yeah,
along with Frankism, Sabbatean Frankism, who he was also funding to push this anti Ten Commandments religion, where this Frank is the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, according to him, which the mainline Jews rejected, obviously. But the point is, the whole focus was not the Illuminati. The focus was Mayor Amschel Rothschild, and they talked about the Rothschild, so they got that mostly right, I think. But that level of nuance, I think, really changes the whole game, because we stop looking at the Illuminati as the issue, which
exactly.
gets a lot of people excited.
And you know, their a terse handling of it by saying that it is simply an anti-monarchist group. Well, they didn't point out that a Jew, Rothschild, paid for Adam Weishaupt to write that Jewish Freemasonic order, basically.
Right.
Well, okay, did it go anywhere? No, it was never even finished. And recently, it came out, I don't know, 10 years ago. To me, that's recent. You can read the right of the Illuminati. It has nothing to do with people. Well, it thinks it has to do with Rothschilds assuming a fake name, the Rothschilds becoming a lord, a Rothschild becoming a peer in Britain, a Rothschild become Lord Rothschilds. Okay, why? Because they knew the following. Lionel Curtis knew this. He wrote books on imperialism, and even before Cecil Rhodes, in the 1870s, earlier, they were writing books on imperialism, how the colonial empire of Britain needed to die, and a new imperial empire, a corporate empire, needs to take over for the monarchy.
Right.
That would have worked out, except that the Privy Council members of the monarchy are the same people who were meeting with Cecil Rhodes. They're the same group of people, and they still are to
Right.
this very day. And so Cecil Rhodes, the Rothschilds, how about the three Rothschilds? And, the four richest people in Britain met together, and that was
Well,
Cecil Rhodes'
remember, we
protege.
need to talk about the hidden Rothschilds. Besides Rosebery and Henry de Worms, there was also the Bacharachs, which were a whole new group of people that, as we now see, in the early 1900s, were infiltrating the U.S. Congress. And one of them was the father of eminent domain. So they were working on getting their assets covered very early on in our government.
Oh, CYA, cover your assets. That's right.
Mm,
Because that's exactly what the 24 plan that Lillian Scott Troy pointed out, and others that William T. Stead surely knew about, that the Astors surely knew about. All the people they're talking about knew what the secret was, but they weren't allowed to talk about it, or else they might have been put on the Titanic and sunk with it.
they were, Douglas.
Of course, the Astor and William T. Stead and a whole lot of other
I
things.
mean, it's not funny, but it's what happened.
Well, because Astor wanted these American robber barons wanted to become kings of their own right in a new type of kingdom, a corporate imperialism where they all get together and control the world, and that's what Lionel Curtis wrote books about. That's what Balfour had H.G. Wells write a book called New World Order, folks.
Right. You know, one of the things about that presentation, as I'm thinking about it now, one of the presenters, it's the one who had the radio call letters behind him. I thought he went out of his way to give these players a benefit of the doubt, and with the idea that he was saying that they were doing this because that was sort of the trend of the day, and they weren't necessarily doing it for any evil purposes, but they were just carrying on business. Now, I get what he's saying, because I used to be there as I began to look at this data. At first, you don't want to assume that everybody you're reading about has a hidden agenda. I mean, that's as Christians, we're taught not to be judgmental, to give people the benefit of the doubt. But here's where I think that falls short, in that what we have been observing is this level of evil that has inculcated the activities of these people since the 1600s, 1500s. As we march into the 19th century and into the 20th century, we see these layers of bloodline who have carried on this evil. So therefore, you really can't say about any of these people that they were innocent, that they were just kind of going along with the trends of the day. If they weren't aware of their evil, they are what's the right word? If they weren't aware of the evil, they really are ignoramuses. And I don't see any of these people as ignoramuses. So therefore, I think that part of his presentation was the weakest of the presentation itself. And I don't think the other presenters necessarily agreed with him on that.
Well, I'd give him his age as his excuse. He's young and
Right.
he's doing a good job, it seems, and he wants to be very considerate of his audience and make sure that they come along with us. Personally, I think there's so much to be said. That's why I go so fast sometimes. But I do take a breath now and then. And they poor two of them never took a breath in the whole time. And that poor guy from history, I wonder if he sleeps at night. He's got all those facts in his head, right? But he's missed the central point. He hasn't stood back enough to say, excuse me, there's a forest there. I know all you think is there is trees, but there's a whole forest there. Here, let's go up above and look at the big forest and see how it relates to everything else.
Well, how could you ever do that and come up with anything if you didn't have a kind of a guiding principle to start hooking some memory hooks, some mental hooks, some timeline hooks? I guess that's why we ended up gravitating to the idea of presenting this data in a timeline, because then we start seeing the connections and how these people are all associated together. So when you read these things that occurred, let's say before World War I, in the precursor to World War I, for example, we see that Lloyd George. What was the activity? Lloyd George formed the War Council before World War I in 1914, and what we see is 2 days before he formed that War Council, he had arrested Baron von Horst and put von Horst in prison 2 days before. Lillian Scott Troy's friend and sponsor. Now, when you see those two facts together, all of a sudden you see, there's no coincidence here. Somehow von Horst was a threat to them, so much so that was on his mind 2 days before he formed his war cabinet.
Knowing those details, those intimate details, and putting it in a biographical sense brings it home to people, really takes it to their heart and puts it into their willpower. Now, there's two things that were a little bit short-sighted there in their presentation, and that's that when it came down to it, if you were to say, well, what is the analysis for you of how these secret societies are able to work? All they say is it's circles within circles within circles. Okay, that is describing the way the Vatican works, the way that the Italian bankers work, the Italian banking families worked, the Italian city-states, the Lombards, the Saxons, then the Dutch, and then the Germans, and then the British bankers, okay?
You mean
And they
everybody?
all follow. That's the Jesuits too. Oh, wait, and the Jesuits. It is clearly one at the top, and they have power of life and death over everybody else. And then there's usually 3 around them, small group around them, then 10 around them, and then everyone who's got a stake in the game. And nobody else plays. And
well, Douglas, I mean, think about it. That's just classical human organization. Sure. Everything in every walk of life is organized that way. So there's nothing unusual about that.
Well, it's secret. It's so that only one person can hold all the secrets, and that's the deal. So that only the Pope has all the secrets. Only the Doge has all the secrets. Only Cecil Rhodes had all the secrets, and later he thought he was passing it on to William T. Stead. Then no. So they mentioned the Prussians, and they mentioned this circle within circle within circles. And that goes nowhere for me. When you want to talk about a conspiracy theory, I need to know how that plays in now. Is that one of these evolution of civilization earmarks? Is that Cecil Rhodes' group just died? No, it didn't. And they don't get the exact sequence, and they miss a few of the different things. They don't understand Chatham House is part of it. They don't understand that the Tavistock Institute is part of it. They don't understand the War Propaganda Board is part of it. They don't understand the other elements to broaden it out instead of just being a conspiracy of people. It's also all the things that those people did. And if you don't understand that Tesla's inventions were stolen, and why? Because that's more powerful than all the money in the world. That's all the future money in the world. If you
Right.
get all the technology, if you get all the patents. And so the Prussians, they went into again and again, the Prussians and the Prussian education and John Taylor Gatto and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, great, great, great. Well, let's remember, the Prussians thought they were the Second Reich. Okay? What did Hitler think he was? The Third Reich. They can't get over hegemony. Okay, so these two little states there, up there in Germany, these two little Prussian states wanted to rule the world. Okay, what did Cecil Rhodes want to do? Rule the world. What did Alfred Milner want to do? Rule the world. What did Lionel Curtis do? Rule the world. Why can't they just take a piece of the world? No, not good enough for them. No, rule the world. How do they do it? Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, where they would cut off the top of the head to experiment on the live brain of a human, as a daily routines. They did the worst experimentation on humans ever done. These were the pre-Nazis. This is Kaiser Wilhelm's intimate group, and the British lusted after that information, and they lusted after the fact that the Germans and the Prussians particularly would do anything for the state. They didn't care how many people had to die in the experimentation, and that's why the Germans had so many patents. And when it comes down to it, let's break it down. These guys never said a word about what the Prussian education system is. Well, they insinuated. It's to take your child from you and make them a citizen of the state. That's what we do here in America. And now you see it so grotesquely in terms of what's happening in schools today, every day. That's the Prussian system. But unfortunately, here in America, it's not a Prussian government. It is an
Let me ask
American
you
government.
something. You're an educator. You and Tyler are both longtime educators. You ran schools of like 10,000 students, right? Did anybody ever come to you and specifically lay out this Prussian system to you, or was the assumption is that you would carry on your higher education and just do it automatically?
I was Waldorf teacher. I was a Catholic school teacher, public school teacher, private school teacher, then became a principal superintendent, and in the end had 28 schools, I think, with 10,000 students a year. Yes, I was very involved in that. Not once, except when I got to my last assignment before I started working with Tyler. And that man was a genius. He was an absolute genius. And he brought in the work of John Taylor Gatto, which I had never heard of, the man who had won the Teacher of the Year, I think, in New York. He had a lot of great ideas, John Taylor Gatto, and he got really obsessed with the Prussian thing and the fact that it is true. Everything that's all true. Every speck of that is true. That the American education system had no geniuses. John Dewey, who taught us how to label books and where to put them in the library, and even
A good
then,
Pilgrim, by the way.
a good Pilgrim to make sure that only certain books got in, and with Carnegie money to make sure that only the good books, the good British books, the Arnold Toynbee version of history books, which Carroll Quigley thought he was to inherit. Carroll Quigley is so crazy. He thought that his pathetic view of the evolution of civilizations, which he puts into a group of 6 stages and then 7 kind of things you can see, and then he thinks he controls it, and he thinks he can end the cycle of the decline of nations. That's how nuts he is. He wanted into the Pilgrims, but he couldn't get there. He couldn't even understand the Pilgrims. He understood everybody and who married everybody, and every single banker's daughter who married another banker's daughter or a cousin, or every place that a Rothschild dollar went was in his books. Why? Because he was trying to show them that he worshiped them. But Carroll Quigley was a pathetic thinker, and his version of history and the way that it was transferred was simply plagiarized from other people and very weakly presented, in my opinion, because many others had presented it much better, especially Rudolf Steiner, Shearer Aurobindo. Many other ones have done a much better job now. Even William Aaron Thompson gives a better version. So the point is that Carroll Quigley thought and taught for 30 years in a Jesuit institution the brainwashing lies that the British are absolutely driven in snow, pure white. Yeah, they're white. They're white supremacists. And when you're talking about the richest Rothschilds and Cecil Rhodes, who was literally turned into the richest man by a Rothschild, let's remember that. Cecil Rhodes wouldn't have gone anywhere without a Rothschild. What did they want to do? Take over the world. And when these 3 gentlemen allow the word collectivism to be used so loosely, they should simply close their books, and burn all of them and go back and start over. Collectivism is the excuse of the elite as the panacea for those who are enslaved by the elite. It isn't a form of the elite creating a collectivism that's a world government or a new world order. That's complete stupidity. That's the last thing they want. They're an exclusive secret club. It doesn't even fit into their system that they presented today, that it's a circle inside a circle inside a circle. But it's going to also
Yeah,
have these other
I
characteristics.
thought that part of their presentation was probably the least effective, in that they said, well, you got the Fabians over here, and then you've got the collectivists over here, and then you've got Toynbee over here, and you got the community, what they call that, the settlement movement over there. They never really brought that together, and they sort of presented them as separate strains of thought, when in fact, as we looked into the details of that, the Fabians were just sort of sitting out there watching the round table, Cecil Rhodes, and they were talking about the political collectivists and then the theoretical collectivists as two different groups, and they sort of operated together. I didn't see any of that. All I saw was you had the folks associated with Rothschild and Cecil Rhodes working out their plan, and all the rest are kind of sitting around the edges waiting for a handout.
Oh,
That's the Fabians were all just waiting for a handout.
Cecil Rhodes was the Society of the Elect. Elect means exclusive and secret. Now, the Webbs, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, who created Fabianism, got the whole shtick from another guy who was doing a spiritual thing, and they turned it into a political thing. Right. And then they merged with John Ruskin and basically what Arnold Toynbee and Seeley, J.R. Seeley, and the others were saying, no, imperialism, white imperialism, it's got to rule the world. We're doing those poor natives a favor by taking over their lives. They need to thank us. That's who John.
I mean, look at us. Look at us. We sit in our cigar smoking dens, and we sip brandy, and we have all these peons who do work for us as lords of the manor. And how could you do it better than us?
John Ruskin never consummated his marriage with his wife because he was a homosexual. He only married to literally be a show, in the fact that he was so followed by so many because he was the one saying that the British art and the British music and everything British was the best thing in the whole world. Right. And so Arnold Toynbee said the whole same thing, but he wrote it into history, and so did Will and Ariel Durant, and so did all of the people connected with the settlement movement and these excuses, including all of the groups that you have revealed. Those are all social, philanthropic excuses for being an elite.
Well, they left out some really important facts here, and one of them was the formation and purpose of the YMCA. Another one was the formation and purpose of the Salvation Army and the YWCA and the Boy Scouts. And so they kind of missed that whole undercurrent. They talk about slavery, they talk about debt slavery, but what they didn't bring into this play at all was how the bankers, this was driven by the bankers. The settlement movement was driven by the bankers because they needed new labor after they gave up their brown and black slaves. And so they created all these mechanisms to recruit young men to the cities for their factories. And that began the continuum that was driven through the banking system and through the Pilgrims into our present time. And they missed that whole strain of it. It's just like banking was an issue, politics was an issue, philosophy was an issue, but they weren't merged into any one grand scheme, as we now know, is what the Pilgrim Society was all about. So look at how effective the Pilgrims have been at keeping the world confused about what they were doing.
They're masters of propaganda. When the British East India Company, Dutch East India Company,
they mentioned that. That's another strain.
When they went into basically out of corporate independence, and they were actually a colonial empire themselves, they decided that they were going to take over the British government. And they did. And it was so easy that they said, oh, well, that's nothing. We can do much more. Let's get 56 Commonwealth nations that we also control. Let's have control of India and control of China, control of Russia, control of everything. But as we do this, we're losing control of our slaves. Well, as you have pointed out again and again, this is an economic issue for these people. They don't care that millions of people die because of their economic decisions. That's
Right.
part of the game. That's
Right.
what bankers do. So, what did they do? From early on, before slavery was outlawed in Britain, and then, of course, continued in the Caribbean and other places, as you pointed out, under different guises. What happened? They had to sit around in their little think tanks, drinking tea and smoking their cigars. And in most of these cases, these were sexual perverts. And I'm not exaggerating in any sense of the word. These are very seriously psychotic people. Because at
Correct.
that time, it was illegal to be a sexual pervert, if you get my drift. But they put their lives on the line to be independent in that way and think that they are above other people. These are elitists beyond your imagination who had the wealth of the world in their hands. And they had to decide now, okay, first off, we create a scam so that we have offshore accounts to get back all the money we're going to lose from slavery being outlawed. Second off, we have to make sure that the entire British East India Company Corporation and Cecil Rhodes's taking over South Africa and the Transvaal and all of the evil that he did in Africa has to now, that money has to be put someplace. So where are we going to put it? Not into the government, into a personal, corporate, and you can basically say banker, venture capital money that is going to take over the world. So how do we do it? First thing, we have to prove that we're better than everybody by doing what? By creating philanthropic groups that look like we are the best people in the world, and that everything we're actually doing in those philanthropic groups are the opposite of what we were really doing. And
Mhm.
that's why we have to have control of propaganda. Then we have to take control of all media. So we have to steal every single technological patent that there is. Then we have to take control of all, well, of course, newspapers and wireless and radio and television. But then we have to take control of what? Education. And at the same time, buying every politician that has any power anywhere. And so that has always been their plan. The
Right.
24 plan is basically just a way that they give rewards to people who get into this system so that once they're in the system, I'm excited. I went to Oxford. I was allowed into All Souls College. If you want to did they mention All Souls College in their talk? Well,
Hmm. They did.
oh, okay. Because if you don't mention that, you miss the whole thing. Okay, you were selected and invited into this group. Okay, and that group still controls the world. And we've proven it in so many different ways. It doesn't matter whether you want to say no, BlackRock and T. Rowe Price and Vanguard control the world. Yeah, correct. But who controls them? Who owns them? And who owned them to begin with? And who's at the heart of every central bank? Whether it's national or private or whatever, it's the same owners.
Right.
And guess who's the richest person in the world? The Queen of England.
Oh,
And
besides her.
we don't know. No one knows. She's got 56. Well, no, she's got what, 28 or some offshore islands that literally she can put her fake money into that she steals
Oh,
from.
by the way, just as a side note, we just discovered the original slave ledgers of Hamilton Brown, who was Kamala Harris's great 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 grandfather. The actual certified copies of his ledgers of the slaves he owned. And what we now can see is that he was one of the chief Rothschild representatives in Jamaica setting up the offshore banking system there. So Kamala has got a very interesting heritage to live down.
You are Hillary
Excuse me.
Clinton's worst nightmare because you can't be debunked.
Uh, just to interrupt, because one of the things I noticed is that they do not talk about Lillian Scott Troy, and probably
Yeah.
didn't know anything about her because the history and everything on the internet has been scrubbed of her. Can you say a little bit about that, Mike?
Well, the interesting thing about her is that, yes, if you try to search on her in the search tools, you'll see stuff that's been posted recently, but you won't see the historical information. It's not there. But if you actually go to those historical archives, you can find it. So what that shows us is that there is some sort of history engine out there that's capturing certain requests and blocking them. And one of them would be Lillian Scott Troy, because she was a player. Clearly, she was a political player. Now we've just investigated more about her brothers. Her brothers, two of the three, were attorneys. And they were prominent attorneys who were fighting these banks back in late 1800s, early 1900s. And at that time, they were prominent Democrats. Today, I don't know what the political party they would espouse to, but they were fighting these banks who were coming in and trying to buy up the property in San Francisco as non local citizens, and they were advocating for various types of local investment for their utilities. And so Lillian, what we can see is that Lillian and her second brother, Robert, actually married the widow of one of the former senators in California. And her younger brother, who was older than her, was an archivist for various history organizations in California. So what we can now see is that Lillian was schooled well by her brothers, and probably in some ways protected legally, because they did not hesitate at suing people for defamation, for libel, they were up for the fight. And so Lillian was educated by her older brothers. And so now we can kind of see where some of this spunk is coming from that we see in her by the time she arrives in London in 1908. This woman was not afraid of anybody because she had seen how the game is played, and she used it to her advantage. But she was not talked about, and in history, we only find her in the congressional record, which is where we found her. And since then, the information on her has exploded. There's probably more information out there about her than most of the key players of the Pilgrim Society that we find. Most of that's been heavily censored too. But you won't find a Wikipedia entry on her. You can't really find information about her. Oh, by the way, we're putting together a zip file of all the research that we have discovered on her, and we'll be publishing that shortly.
And that's why you never let your gnomes out of the mines?
That's correct. They're in there.
Well,
They're in there
really don't care.
continually. We keep thinking we're done, and then we keep finding new documents.
They don't like the light. They like to stay down there. And it just, you see, that's what these gentlemen are missing. Even though I do believe that they had a lot of evidence that they've looked at, it's how do you process it? Now, unfortunately, in the overload information age, these three gentlemen are basically the result of that overload and not being able to handle it. The young man is trying to, through self-development, find out where truth is in the world, and he's on the path, okay, and that's good. And he tries to bring his whole audience along with him. The guy from the History Channel, he didn't care. I doubt his wife probably gave up talking to him a long time ago. Okay, I'm certain of that. And if he ever had a wife, basically no one could keep up with him. I was keeping up. You know why? I made 4 or 5 notes. Oh no, it wasn't
Amazing.
from History Man. It was from Kevin. Kevin made me have to write down 4 or 5 things to check, and I checked them.
Yeah, they had some good sources.
Oh, that's right. Of course, I forgot that was the guy who did that. So I checked out some of his deeper insights in terms of connections and who's who. He's a who's who guy. He's like talking to our dear friend Christopher Strunk, because he's a who's who. Whoever it is, Christopher Strunk's dad or Chris knew them.
Right.
It doesn't matter who it was. Or you talk to John Barnwell and it's like, well, he knew who. And that's where, H.G. Wells wrote that in Balfour's house in Whittingham and he wrote it because, and you go, how do you know that? That's nowhere. Well, this obscure book here, you see this obscure book, it's the only one in the universe. And it says right here, and he'll pull out to the page. That's who Kevin was. Kevin is, he's a bibliophile. Good
Right.
work. But he doesn't have the overview. And again, it looks as if his brain's going to explode from what he knows.
Well, one of the things I've noticed about a lot of people that deal in these assessments is that, and maybe this is why coming at it from an engineer, I take a little bit different tack. If I find a piece of evidence that is convincing, then I think the best thing to do is to archive that evidence so that it can't be lost again. And unfortunately, a lot of these bibliographies and these books are really hard to follow. So at the time a person writes a book, they have a bibliography reference, which oftentimes they'll put in their footnotes. But then if you want to actually see the source material, you've got to go find that document. fortunately, with the internet and the ability to do linking, we decided to say, okay, we're not just going to give somebody a bibliography, because that doesn't really help them. What really helps them is having the source document. Then they don't need to rely on third-party historians to get to the facts. And I think that's where a lot of research falls short in terms of helping people move along in this truth history. And hopefully, the information that we're publishing and you're publishing, and hopefully more of these people will stop. They will say, I'm not just going to give the bibliography reference. I'm going to go find the source document, because that, by the way, will be judicially recognizable. Your bibliography of it really isn't. I mean, you might make an argument for it, but ultimately you have to find the source document. And yeah, I'll give you one off-the-wall example. Remember that saying that's often ascribed to Stalin, I don't care if people vote, I care who counts the votes. Most of the fact checkers say that's made up. And I had heard that so many times, I finally we decided to go looking for whether or not that was a made up document. And when you know it, we found the actual Russian history book where his secretary documented that he did say that. And it was in Russian, translated numerous times. And so there we have a solid piece of evidence. He did say that. And so you forget all the fact checkers. They're lying if they just made it up. They said it's not real. He didn't really say that. He did say that.
And that's what you do so well, you and the miners and those gnomes and the dwarfs. And I don't know how many people you have down there, but it's amazing what they just throw up, and somehow you grab it and you put it all together. I have to applaud you for that.
Thank you.
Because you put it in perspective, and it's exactly as we've said now twice before. It's because you yourself have literally, in that same timeline, have had events happen to you that demonstrate that all of these things are true, and it's actually the same people doing it.
Right.
So that's what these guys might be missing a little bit, but it's okay. I suggest that at least two of them get out and do a little more socializing. And as Tyler pointed out, they need to learn to be teachers and, actually have a point that you're driving home and repeat it and then repeat it again, because people take 5 times to go from
Well, I think the one thing they could help
temporary to permanent memory.
What they could help on is really focus on the Pilgrim Society and the fact that they are driving the bus right now in this new world order, new, what do they call it, liberal world order. And just as one key item of fact is that in 2000 and when was the crash? 2008. In 2007, and actually it goes back to 2002, Henry Kissinger became a vice president of the Pilgrim Society in New York. And he was a vice president through the banking crash. Both he and Volcker were vice presidents of the Pilgrim Society. So if you think it's not still relevant, stick that one in your pipe and smoke it.
Yeah. And look up SES and look up Serco and look up Crown Agents.
Right.
And look up the U.S. Patent Office. Where do the initial patents go for screening? Blah, blah, blah. And you will find that the answer to all the questions that money is flowing, there's a toll booth put there.
Where's the outrage in that? Where's the outrage in our Congress at that fact alone? That the British run our patent office.
Listen, they're all
it's outrageous.
Well, they're all paid off by the Brits. And I don't know what my camera is, but look here, Michael, we did something over the weekend. I thought you might be interested in it. Douglas and I feel like we have so much in our heads and we got to get it out. We don't have time to write it. So we have started an audio library, like a diary, and we're putting it over on Substack. And they're going to be 20 to 30 minutes, not long, of discussions that we have in the kitchen and whatever. And you are one of the reasons that we're doing it, because so many times you will ask the most interesting questions that Douglas responds to. And these are things that are more esoteric, spiritual. They might tie into the political. So from time to time, when Douglas says, hey, that's a great question, but let me record it, that's because
that's great.
Put in on our Substack. We've already got 3. I'm going to try to do them as we're cooking and working, and there will all be educational.
Beautiful.
Yes.
That's great.
Mhm.
You know, those unanswerable questions that you come up with late at night that you then ask me, you know, as soon as we're done doing one of these podcasts, those are what we want you to ask, because we want an impromptu answer, and we want a genuine question from someone who's actually interested in the question, so that if I don't answer it, you can stop me or say, oh, no, that's not clear. Or can you, what the heck does that mean? Or, you know, so I think it's
Well, I
perfect.
think you have one of the things contributions you've made to my life is that you have brought the kind of a practical spiritual assessment over this, and you talk a lot about consciousness, and I think that is what is missing from a lot of the history, is there's not an awareness that there's an overarching spiritual dimension here that it's hard for people to understand. And given your experience and given your background, you've got a lot to say about those subjects, and I find them very, especially the role of the unseen world in the affairs of men. And I think that hopefully you'll talk about that.
That's exactly what the three gentlemen came up with. What was the conclusion to the discussion? Consciousness. And how did they get to
Mhm.
consciousness? Bringing the books, and bringing these little seeds that they gave you, so that you'll go do your own research. So that's what they said was the answer.
Yeah,
Well, that is the
that's
answer.
good.
That is correct. But you can be much, much more specific. And so that's what we do. We keep trying to be as specific as we can for you, because everyone goes a different path. And though I could recommend to you a book that every time I read it, it seems as if I transcend without any effort. I just read the dadgum book, right? You
Hmm.
could read it and think it was a piece of garbage. Okay. Like the book, The Alchemist. Everybody is reading that now, and it's one of the most popular books there is. Delightful little
Douglas, you
book.
can't say that and then not name the book.
Alchemist.
Oh, is that the book? Okay.
Yeah, you told Aiden to read it. And so I read it, and went, yeah, it's a perfect little fairy tale that shows you the realities of life and walks you through all the suffering, and shows you that suffering and joy, those are balanced by your own perception. So
So,
these,
Alchemist wasn't Isaac Newton an alchemist?
sure,
Yeah.
sure. Tyla's an alchemist. She makes silver water. She makes everything. You name it. She makes it. If it could be made at home, in any, no matter how complicated, she makes it. Why?
There you go.
I think secretly she doesn't trust the others, and
Mhm.
she's good because her stuff is way better anyway. So, I appreciate that what you say, and yes, because, and I'll just say this bluntly. I don't know. I don't even know who this recording's for, but or let me just put it this way. I know what clairvoyants experience. Clairvoyants, clairaudience, clairsentient people experience, right? And that leads those people into the strangest circumstances that you could ever imagine. And so they get themselves involved in things that you are literally supernatural. They're paranormal, and they defy any explanation, especially to a logical engineer. So the fact that you're also highly spiritual, and that you chose the most sacramental of all the religions out there, and I have a degree in comparative religions, you chose Russian Orthodox, by far the most
Eastern
sacramental.
Orthodox.
Well, Eastern Orthodox, but you do the Russian thing,
It's
right?
larger than Russian.
Yeah, but you do the Russian thing because they are the coolest, and they're the most. They take the longest, and they create a holy atmosphere, and they build a celestial edifice and the whole thing. So that's what you chose after your wide experience in Christianity, as I, in my experience,
Right.
have chosen a path that we call the Gospel of Sophia. But anyway, the point is, I appreciate that, and I love the fact that your questions are always so pointed that they usually get me back into a corner, and I have to answer a question I've never even considered, which is the only way that you're really going to justify and demonstrate to somebody that what you're saying is true. And that's what these three gentlemen lacked. They lacked the human experience to be able to say, well, when I was in Russia, or when I was in Prussia, or when I was in Germany, or when I was in Britain, or when I was doing this, or I was involved with the very things you're talking about, then it comes home to people. And so the fact that you and I and Tyler have such a broad experience in life, that helps so much in what it is that we're trying to present. Plus, you've been fighting for your life for 20 years, and for your
For my
shareholders.
shareholders to get paid for the invention that the government and the British stole.
Nothing is a better motivation than that.
Well, actually, I think all of us have a case here against these people because they not only stole it from you, they weaponized it against the citizens of the world. You
Right.
talk about domestic terrorism, and they even mention as much in the video. The Pilgrim Society and the members, and all the way down to senior executive service, which would include your Five Eye operations like the CIA and FBI, they're all
And
domestic
MI6,
terrorists.
MI5.
But the problem is they have control of the reins. So
Right.
in closing, how do we, the people, get out from under this tyranny? Do you have some thoughts about that?
In Five Eyes, end offshore accounts, all of this would collapse.
Fire all the SES members.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. That would be, I would want to do that personally myself. Oh, hi, SES. Yeah, you're fired. Next.
You know what? All 10,000 of them gone, we wouldn't even notice they're gone.
We didn't notice. They weren't essential personnel. They weren't there for a long time, and no one noticed because they don't do anything. All they
Correct.
do is bureaucratically
That would be an enormous positive step for our government.
Yes. And hanging a few of the traitors would be good for our morale.
Correct.
So anyway, what we've done here is we've analyzed what these guys were saying. I don't mean in any way to be mean, because as I said, I think all three of them are actually brilliant and that they're doing a good job and that they're their own path. That was back in 2013. I imagine 9 years later, that they're hip to Americans for Innovation and AIM Cats. I hope they're hip to it. If not, somebody on this needs to contact those guys and tell them.
Yeah, I'd love to meet them.
Here's the message. The message is from Betsy Ross. Hey guys, giddy up.